Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me because I have had some issues with my earphones, so I hope that it's loud and clear. Okay, so I'm just going to get my things set up here. Okay. Hello everyone. So I had this, I don't know if you follow me on Instagram, you will have seen this, but I was just kind of thinking a little bit of like how I think about what I do and what motivates me and what gets me really excited. And the thing that I posted was that I believe that magic happens when women clinicians are deeply healthy, like really deeply, not like a superficial, but like really like to the core healthy, and energized and just like lit up by the work that they do. Like the work that you're doing in the world is really kind of lighting you up. Like I just feel like the combination of those things just like is so incredible, and it's just like the most amazing thing. And yeah, it just gets me so excited to think about that. So I was just thinking about that kind of concept, and yeah, I thought I'd share that while we are waiting. See if anyone still wants to join live. So hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I am your health and recovery coach for women clinicians. And today we're going to be talking about just a few clinician stories. So I took 3 stories and I just kind of took the main kind of concepts that I wanted to share and the main kind of shifts and transformations that I wanted to share. But I almost combined different people's stories, sometimes a bit of my own story, so that they are not recognizable as like, oh, I know that person, or like, that's me, or whatever. So if you do genuinely like, if it's like describing exactly you, please realize that wasn't like intentional and I wasn't like calling you out, but it can also be really helpful to just realize, you know, other people also experience that. Yeah, so I'm just going to be sharing those stories, but you can kind of listen to it from the perspective of even if you don't necessarily, even if it's not the exact same situation that you are in or have been in, you can still listen to kind of the process and the perspective shifts and the changes, and those could be relevant in your situation as well. Sometimes they can spark a little bit of like a aha moment for you of like, oh, I think I could apply that in this way. And I also wanted to share a few kind of snippets on like how we will be applying these various things and workshopping them this coming weekend. So if you haven't signed up for the Refill workshop, go ahead and do that. These are the kinds of things that we'll be workshopping. Workshopping together, and it'll be me and other women clinicians, and we'll be looking at how we can actually fill our own cups. So working from a space of a filled up cup, and rather than a cup that is feeling drained and not resourced or no reserves in it. And the first story that I wanted to share is kind of related to why we even want to do that, and I'll go more into that this weekend. But this clinician had this kind of, and we call it sometimes like people-pleasing, or yeah, that kind of idea. A lot of the times we phrase it as like, I'm just too nice. And this clinician had this belief like, oh, I'm just too nice. And that's why, you know, I stay later with a patient, even though that wasn't in the plan, or even though they were late, I gave them extra time, or even though I wasn't supposed to be working in those hours, they phoned me up and I went to the practice to see them. And I'm not saying all of that, that's not always like people pleasing, whatever, sometimes it's an urgent patient, of course. But I'm talking more of like a pattern of constantly overstepping what you want to do, constantly overstepping your own boundaries, or throwing them out the window, or just like doing things that it feels like it's coming at a cost to you, like it's draining from you. You're putting other people first at a cost to you. And the narrative behind that is like, I'm just too nice. And what I was exploring with this clinician is that when we think about it as, and I mentioned this in one of my lives on time management because it shows up there as well. When we think about this from a perspective of I'm being too nice, you can see how that's not really going to motivate us to change. And you can see how that just the perspective or how we think about what we're doing is one of the things that is going to determine whether or not we actually make change, whether we or not we actually want to move away from where we are. And framing it as I'm just too nice and that's why I'm doing all of these things can be something that gets in the way of changing it, because why would you want to change being nice, right? Like, it sounds very good and it sounds very noble, and it often is coming from a very good place. But often those is I will do at some point a whole live on people pleasing because I think it shows up a lot. But just remember that people pleasing is a protective pattern. So in some sense, you find it threatening, even if it's not like you don't consciously say that, but there's something threatening about having other people be disappointed, having other people not be pleased with you, having other people think a certain way about you, whether that's correct or not correct, make assumptions about you, judge you in any particular way. Like we see that as an actual threat. And so people pleasing is a type of stress response called the fawn response, where we are actually trying to protect ourselves from that perceived threat. So I just want to say that in the context of like, you don't just decide to not be people pleaser, then you're not. But more from this perspective of, if that's how you're framing it, you're probably not likely to change it, because then in your mind, you're saying, I need to be less nice, right? And that doesn't sound very motivating. So what we kind of shifted towards is, how is, setting boundaries, keeping to your time with patients, not taking on extra patients when you didn't want to, not taking on patients when you already had plans with your family, all these kinds of things. How can we see that as actually the nice option, or the kind option, or the compassionate option? Because this practitioner was at the point that she just didn't want to do this anymore. She just was feeling so exhausted. She felt frustrated. She was resentful of her patients. She felt like, I'm giving so much. Surely I should have, firstly, like a successful practice. I should be busy. People should be appreciative. They should be like singing my praises to the whole world. There's like this resentment as well, because you feel like you're not getting back what you are giving in. And we just started to explore this idea of, when you are actually in that place where you feel like you are taking care of your needs, and that is not at the detriment of other people. It can feel like that in the beginning, especially when you're used to doing the opposite, but you're not actually harming anybody by doing that. And how can you start to shift this idea of, if I am actually setting boundaries and like I feel energized, I feel joyful, I feel I'm giving from a place of I already have enough and I'm giving to you from that place. How is that actually the nicest thing and the kindest thing and the most compassionate thing? And how can, if we follow things kind of to the long term, like I said, this clinician was thinking of, not practicing anymore because she just felt like she couldn't anymore. And so if that practitioner get so burnt out and so overwhelmed and so resentful that they close their practice, or let's say they take on less patients, or they work less, or whatever it is, because they're feeling that way, that is anyway being less of service to those patients. So if we are so burnt out and so exhausted that we literally can't give anymore, you can see how in the long term, that's not really the kindest option. That's not really the nicest option, right? And you can actually be less of service in the long term when you are approaching it from this perspective. So it's just having this perspective shift away from being too nice, and how can we think about giving from a place of having a full so-called or metaphorical cup. If our cup is full, and giving from that place, how different that feels, and how much more sustainable it is. And this is, like I said, an idea that we're going to go into more detail about in the workshop, and really have you like connecting to that vision of like, why is it important to have a full cup, and how is it not selfish or like harming someone else or taking away from someone else. Like, it's really from a place of service, and it actually allows you to give more and in a more sustainable way while having yourself feel so filled up. So that was the first story that I wanted to share with you. Please feel free in the comments to share anything that you resonate with, and anything that you like, oh yeah, that was me or is me. And yes, it just helps us all to know that we're not struggling alone, and that we're not uniquely flawed, or there's something wrong with us, or whatever it is. Okay, so second story. So there's a clinician that I was working with that was really frustrated when her patients, she would, let's say, give them an exercise or something to do at home, and they would come back and they would say, I'm not better yet, or, or it was going slower than they thought, whatever. And she would then ask about the thing that she gave them to do at home, or very familiar with the situation. And they would say, no, they haven't done it. And she was talking to me about this frustration that she had, and how she was just so annoyed with patients that weren't taking responsibility for their health, and now she had to take responsibility for their health. And we were looking at her belief around this. So she literally said it as it's a law of the universe. So she said, it's just how things work. If someone else doesn't, let's say, brings 20%, I have to cover the other 80%. So that's how she was seeing it, as like, it just is how it is, right? If the patient brings less, I have to bring more. And so she was seeing it as like, almost in some sense inconsiderate. And also just, she was feeling so frustrated that, because she felt like, if it's your health, you should be bringing most, like 80% or whatever, and I should be bringing the 20 or whatever it is. But now, because you are, not bringing that, I have to then, etc., etc. And so she would then make more effort with that person. She would go, let's say, over the time that she had for that appointment, because she was going through that exercise again to make sure that they would do it at home, or she would be, talking to them about it and why they weren't doing it and whatever. And then she would run late because she now has to still do the treatment, and etc., etc. So she would essentially create the same situation, right? So because she believed that she had to do more if the patient isn't doing much, she then did do more because that's what she believed she had to do. And then it kept on kind of reinforcing the same pattern, because then she would say, see how much I have to do when someone doesn't take responsibility for their own health. And just sort of looking at, like I say, kind of the thoughts and beliefs around that, because you can think about the idea of, if a patient doesn't take responsibility for their own health, I have to do X, Y, Z. And just thinking about, firstly, the patient not doing their exercise, whatever, is that not taking responsibility for their health? Let's examine that a little bit. Let's talk about that. Let's see how there might be another perspective to take here. Like, what else could be true about this? And then looking at, is it really true that if someone else doesn't take responsibility, or they don't do what they say they're going to do, that I have to do more? Like, is that really true? Is that literally a law of the universe? Is that how things work? And just going into that belief and kind of starting to explore those beliefs. And this is true for all of us. Like, when we have a belief, it is so much part of us that we never even think to question that. She just, like I said, saw it as the law of the universe. Like, it was just unquestioned. And once we started to kind of poke it a little bit and, like, think about what else could be true, how might a different clinician actually think about that? Like, do you think there are people who don't believe that? Like, kind of starting to poke holes at this belief. And that really shifted how much energy she was then expending on those patients. So let's say, for example, the new way she was thinking about it is, I'm going to show up to this patient consult, to every patient consult, with as much as like what I give to patients, my standard of care is always going to be the same. They can choose, they have autonomy over their own actions. They can choose how much they contribute to that. And I can let them know how it might shift, how the results might shift according to how much they bring. But it's not necessarily true that I have to then do more because they didn't do enough or whatever it is. So just kind of that process of looking at some of the thoughts and beliefs that are so ingrained in us and just starting to, like, loosen their grip a little bit on us. Because you can imagine how much less energy she was expending from the one way she was thinking about it to the other. Like, nothing else changed. It was just the way that she was looking at it. And in the one, she's expending so much extra energy every time a patient isn't doing something. And you can see how that would just reinforce how frustrated and angry and annoyed she gets when they aren't doing their part, to a place where she genuinely feels like, I have a certain standard of care and I'm going to do that anyway. And it's regardless of that patient. And sometimes they're not going to be ready to do the work. Sometimes they're not willing. Sometimes they don't make the time, whatever it is. But I don't need to have that affect how much I'm doing. And you can just see how different those energy expenditures are. And again, without having to actually shift anything in the actual, like, nothing else has changed other than the way that she's approaching it, or thinking about it, or believing about it. So in the workshop as well, we will be going more into detail on that and exactly how you can start looking at some of the thoughts and beliefs that you have about certain, like, stresses and triggers and stuff like that in your practice, and how you can, there's like a whole process that we go through on how to actually start looking at those things. And firstly, just seeing what is happening, like getting a little bit of clarity on that. And then you can start to, like, poke at it a little bit and look at other perspectives. Okay, last story. Okay, so with this clinician, she really had she was very, let's say, cognizant of her own health behaviors and her own health. She really wanted to be extremely healthy. And she really wanted to perfect her sleep, because that was, of course, one of the things that she really feels and believes that influences her health a lot, and of course does. Sleep is huge. Please don't get me wrong, sleep is massive. But the way that she was approaching it was very, I want to say, like, perfectionistic. And it was kind of this belief of, like, I have to have this perfect routine. When I go to sleep, I have to have this perfect routine. When I wake up, I have to have this perfect routine during the day to help my sleep at night. And when she didn't have those things perfectly in place, she would get quite anxious. And of course, that doesn't help her sleep either. And then because she's so kind of hectic about getting this good sleep, if something happened that she didn't happen to get that perfect sleep, then she would wake up going, oh my gosh, today is going to be so hard. Because I didn't get enough sleep and I'm going to be useless, I'm going to have no energy, etc., etc. So the way that she was approaching her health, her sleep, in some sense her health, but in this specific case, her sleep. So when we talk about like the cup, the metaphorical cup that we're like filling up or draining out, we want things like sleep to be such a like big filler of our cup, right? And it can be, it's such a powerful way to make sure that you have so many resources and reserves in your tank. But the way that she was approaching her sleep was actually making it more of a drain than a filler. And in the sense that when her sleep was anything less than perfect, her beliefs about that would make her feel even more exhausted the next day and even more drained. And her anxiety about getting her sleep so perfect was actually making her sleep worse because she should be kind of lying in bed and being anxious, like, I need to sleep, I need to sleep. And if she wasn't falling asleep, she would have all these thoughts about like how the next day is going to be and how she's going to function. So it didn't help her sleep itself, and it didn't help her overall like health, how much her cup was filled. So how we started to shift that was just kind of trying to take a different approach and look at kind of like the previous example, what are your beliefs and thoughts about sleep? And when are they not as helpful as we'd like them to be? How can we use routines in a way that helps sleep, but we're not making ourselves just more anxious and more perfectionistic about those things? How can we shift the way that she approaches her sleep in a way that is really, really filling her cup instead of draining it out? So we just started to make slow shifts in her behaviors and her thoughts, and just I think realizing as well, because part of it is you doing it from a perspective of, I'm doing this for my health, I'm doing this to get better sleep. So it comes from a good place and a place of good intention. So even just seeing that shift of realizing that, oh, this is not actually doing what I would want it to do or what I thought it was going to do, etc. And this is, again, something else that we'll talk about more in the workshop on day 2, when we're talking about like filling the tank. Is like, how can we approach things like sleep and nutrition and exercise in a way that is actually beneficial, in a way that is actually filling our cup, rather than just one more thing we have to do perfectly, and one more thing we get anxious about, and one more thing we get overwhelmed by, right? So just how we actually go about approaching these things makes a huge difference in how it actually affects our health in general, and how filled up our metaphorical cup is. So I hope you found those stories helpful. And let me know as well if you guys are planning on joining the workshop. I will be so excited to have you guys there. And I will be giving away a free intensive coaching session to one of the people that joins live. So the intensive session is essentially a one-on-one session where we just go into the 1 or 2 things that you are really, like the points that you are really struggling with, like where are the biggest barriers to you feeling energized and lit up at work, and feeling like you have energy to do the things you want to do, you have the resources to do things you want to do, and you feel like your essentially like your health foundation is very strong. Like, what are the 1 or 2 things that are really the biggest barriers to you getting there? And there's a way we assess that as well, so you don't have to know from like in advance. But in that intensive session, we do 4 hours of coaching, either in one go, obviously with breaks, or kind of split up over 2 days. So that is the session that I will be giving away to one of the people that joins live. So I'll be doing kind of like a draw thing. And yeah, so if you want to join live, that would be awesome. And even just to, when you join live, you also have kind of this, firstly, people in that space together that are in the same situation. But also we're going to kind of be coaching in the comments. So as we're working through things, you can type things into the comments and I'll ask more questions about it, or I'll give you little prompts to think about, or whatever it is. So you actually are getting coaching in that live session as well. So I'd love to see you guys there, and let me know if you'll be joining. And I will also post the link again in the comments. And let me know about the stories. Let us know kind of what you resonate with, what you've experienced, how you maybe had the same experience, but maybe shifted from a different perspective or changed something in a different way that also was really helpful to you. It all helps. It all is ways that we can help each other and support each other. Awesome. I have ended on time for the first time. I'm so proud of myself. Thanks, guys, and have an awesome Sunday.